Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
All right, good morning, beautiful people. Welcome to the Stoa. Today we have our friend returning from Willow, Canadian branch of the Monastic Academy, Seishin or Yasna. She reached out to me and said, hey, I want to do a session. And whenever Seishin reaches out to me, I say yes. So here we are. And it's going to be a 90-minute session. It's going to be a fun one. There will be practices and questions as well. So in the Q&A portion, I think everyone knows the drill. At this point, just put your question in chat and I'll call you to mute yourself. And this will be on YouTube. So that being said, I will hand it over to Seishin. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Peter. Good to see everyone. I see some faces that I know and some faces that I don't. So it's really nice to be with you all. Like Peter said, my name is Seishin or Yasna, depending on what context you might know me from. And I'm the teacher and executive director at Willow, which is the newest Canadian branch of the Monastic Academy. The Monastic Academy is, our main headquarters are in Vermont. That's where the Monastic Academy for the Preservation of Life on Earth is, which is MAPLE for short. And then in California, we have another branch called Oak. And in Canada, we're Willow. We really like our tree names. And so what we are, kind of broadly speaking, is a training center for broad human maturation, which is rooted in ancient Buddhist traditions, but brings in a lot of modern psychotechnologies as well. So we're based on kind of monastery monastic life, but also quite modernized and made more relevant, let's say, for the present times. So what we have is a couple of different training programs. We have a residential program, which is our main one, which is we actually live in community together. People make a commitment of 1 year if they want to be residents, or if they want to be apprentices, it's a month, a minimum of a month, potentially more. And some of you know Nick Benjamin. He's a regular on the Stoa. He was recently an apprentice with us for, I think, 6 weeks. So if you have questions about apprenticeship, I imagine that he would be a good person to talk to about that, about what that experience is like. And we also have, of course, online short-term workshops. We would normally have them in person as well, but of course with COVID, that's not possible right now. So it's just a very brief introduction on who we are and what we do. The way that I want to do this talk today is I'm specifically interested in focusing on explaining more about the residential training program that we do. And I'll talk a little bit about the practices that we have, but actually the more important thing that I wanted to talk about today is the container and the structure that we hold that holds all these practices together. This is kind of this interesting sort of invisible thing that is actually potentially the most important thing that we do. So I really wanted to spend some time talking about that. And then at the end, we'll do like a Q&A discussion period with whatever questions people have. But in between, I wanted to do a little bit of a meditation. Normally at this time on Saturdays at 11 o'clock, we have our regular weekly Willow community call, Willow Zoom call. And in that one, we do a long meditation, something like 30 or 40 minutes. So we're not gonna do it that long today, but I did want to include a meditation aspect of it because I see some of our regular community members have joined for today as well. So going into this training program, there's this question of like, why would you do this to yourself? Why would you go live at a place that's kind of like a monastery, based on a monastery where there's, you know, rigid rules, very high standards. And for me personally, and I think for many people, the reason that I'm drawn to things like this is that I really want to better myself. I really have a drive to kind of learn the ways in which I might be, you know, not seeing things clearly, or things that are maybe weaknesses for me that I can improve. In the past, in my life, this has been, a lot of it has been focused on career. I spent 10 years, more than 10 years in the software world. And so a lot of it was just like getting better at software, being a better team member, becoming a manager, being good at management, knowing how to communicate between people, and so on. But I'm particularly interested actually in broader development. Like, how do I become a better human? How do I become more effective? How do I become more compassionate? How do I delude myself less? How do I lie to myself less? How do I be more clear in my thinking and in my actions? How do I know that the actions that I'm taking are good and beneficial, and so on? And so that's what personally drew me to the Monastic Academy. I've been connected with them for about 4 years, and I joined permanently as a resident about a year ago. And my experience was basically like, over the years of visiting, just seeing the ways that people were improving and just like becoming somehow just more capable, more competent, more loving, more everything good. And I was kind of like, oh, there's something happening here. And I want to be a part of this. So there's a lot of practices that we do in order to make these sort of self-betterment improvements. Things like, of course, meditation. We meditate at Willow, we meditate for 2 hours a day. There's things like circling, which is kind of like a social interpersonal type of meditation. Embodiment, getting into the body, being able to understand better, being able to move, take action from the body. Recently at Willow, we started introducing Gendlin focusing, which has just been incredible. If you're unfamiliar with it, I highly recommend looking it up. We also recently started introducing some of Joe Edelman's values work. So we sometimes introduce these like new things and experiment with them, see how they work. Those two things are kind of new things that we're playing with right now. And then we have things like, chanting. We're working on permaculture stuff, so learning how to live with the land rather than, against it. I just see in the chat, someone said, what is the first practice mentioned? Meditation? Is that the one? I said meditation, circling, embodiment, Gendlin focusing, Joe Edelman's values, chanting, and permaculture. Focusing, yes, Gendlin focusing. In particular, the book I would recommend for that is called The Power of Focusing by Anne Cornell Weiser. She has like a 4-hour audiobook, which is really, really good. You can listen to it in an afternoon and just try it out. That has very little to do with this talk, but really good. Should do it. So we entered this structure where we do all of these different practices, all of them kind of with the intention of learning how to be people who are in high integrity. And we hold ourselves and each other to fairly high standards. So things like tell the truth, don't take things that aren't yours, take care of each other, take care of yourself, be curious and introspective about your experience. All of us are here to grow, so help each other with that. And, a lot more than that. But this is something that a journey that you go into and you kind of can't escape from, because you're living in community and you're always holding yourself and holding each other to these high standards, and of course always falling short of them, and that's fine, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the thing that kind of holds all of this together is what we call the container. So containers aren't really an unusual thing. You can have like short-term containers, like if you go to a retreat or a workshop, there's like certain rules and certain norms and things that happen at certain times, and that's like the container that holds everything together. So you could say that the Stoa, for example, has a container. Because right now, for example, we all know that I'm the one speaking, everyone else is muted. If people were to start unmuting and just kind of like yelling at each other, we would be breaking that container. And then we know, I saw that, Nick, I saw you unmuted yourself. So we know that there's this container that we're holding ourselves to and holding each other to, and then that actually helps us get the most benefit out of being on the stoa together. And so at Willow and at Maple and Oak, I will specifically talk about the Willow container because there's differences between Maple and Oak, but there's largely similarities. But what we have there is a container for everyday life because we're all living together. We have a daily structure that we all go through. We have standards that we have rules, we have norms. And we just, once we enter this, we agree to it. We all agree to it together that, yes, this is what we are doing. This is the container that we are holding and we are all responsible for it. So at monasteries, we aren't a monastery. We are based on monasteries, but we aren't a monastery ourselves. But at, I'll say, real monasteries, it's important and expected and required, basically, that you have awareness and mindfulness in every moment, everything that you're doing. If you're showering, you're aware of the showering, you're aware of the water, you're not doing something else. If you're cleaning, you're not doing something else. You're not thinking about your work, you're not whatever. If you're putting your cup down, you are putting your cup down in the spot that it's supposed to be, and you're doing it mindfully. And there's no break from that mindfulness. It is just every moment, every moment, every moment, every moment, every moment. So that's a standard that we try to hold ourselves to. And part of this is in the schedule that we have. So our daily schedule is basically the same every day. We have one day that's just off every week, but aside from that, the schedule is the same. And it starts in the morning, and it starts with chanting. So this is at Willow, this starts at 6:15 a.m. At Maple, it's actually like 4:45 or 4:40 a.m. So we start a little later. And so for 45 minutes, we do different types of chants. The first chant that we do every day is intended to honor the ones who came before us. So the people who have done the hard work of mental training, all the teachers and masters that came before us that have done, have achieved enlightenment or whatever else. And so we honor them and we recognize that they were normal people just like us, and that this is actually possible for us as well. So in the very first chant of the day, that's what we do. Then the second chant, we chant the 5 precepts that we strive to live by every day. And those are to not kill, to not steal, to not commit sexual misconduct, which means like harming through sexuality, to not lie, speak falsehood, and to not take intoxicants which cloud the mind and cause heedlessness. So every morning we're reminding ourselves of like, this is the standard that I'm setting for myself. This is how I will be today. After that, we chant the summarized teachings of the Buddha, which are to do good, to not do evil, and to purify the mind. So to do good and to not do evil are probably pretty self-explanatory. To purify the mind means to really be aware of what's happening in the mind and to notice when the mind is doing something that isn't actually the intended thing. So for example, if you're meditating and then you notice that you're thinking about that thing that you want to say to someone, there is something that you can do in that moment, which in the Buddhist world is called purification. If that word doesn't land for you, you can just swap it out with something else. But it's basically like, oh, I had the intention of doing a specific thing, and then my mind did something else. And so I'm going to do the thing that needs to happen. If you're doing breath meditation, for example, it can just be like, oh, now I'm going to bring my mind back to focusing on the breath. And that is a tiny little thing that purifies the mind. And you do that over and over and over and over and over. So that's what that chant refers to. After that, we do a compassion chant for those who are facing sickness and death. And then after that, we do a chant from the Heart of Transcendent Knowledge Sutra, which is Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Swaha. And we chant this for almost 30 minutes. And it's an energy chant where you are consistently bringing more and more and more and more and more energy. You're kind of letting go of yourself and just throwing yourself into the chant. And it gets faster and louder as it goes on. And the entire group is holding each other in this. So if you are kind of, slothful or something, or you're not bringing your energy, that actually impacts the group. Whereas I notice sometimes if someone is kind of not being very energetic, and then I bring more energy, then they end up bringing more energy as well. And so this is a way that like you can actually see very clearly how the group impacts each other and supports each other. And most important actually in that role is the chant leader. They are the one that is responsible for the energy of the group and for bringing forth everything that they can in order to energize us. So after this has been 45 minutes now, the first 45 minutes of the day. And so in that time, we've looked at how we want to be, how we want to present ourselves in the day, the things that are important to us, that are important to keep in mind. We've brought compassion, and we have energized ourselves in this really, really intense way. And then the chanting finishes. And so now we're in this like beautiful, energized state, ready to do the next thing. And the next thing is meditation. And so we meditate for an hour. And so again, when you're meditating, you're just meditating. That is the thing that you're doing. You're not doing something else. You're not planning your day. Of course, that's going to come up. Those thoughts are going to come up, and that's fine. Then you work with that. But we remember that we have this schedule, and in this schedule, you do the thing that you're meant to do at that time. And it's as simple as that, and it's as hard as that. And in meditation, we can also see the way that we impact each other. And so one thing that I notice a lot of is that if we're all very still, and then one person shuffles, within a minute or two, someone else will shuffle. It just, that seems to be how it goes. And then there's more shuffling and so on. And of course, it's fine to change your posture. It's not like some sort of abhorrent thing or something, but it's a really good way to see how we impact each other through just our own actions. And it's a good way to see how the standard that you hold yourself to is the standard that other people will actually begin to hold themselves to. So it's a really interesting mirror in that way. So after chanting, we go into an exercise period. And so this is an hour, and it's an hour where everyone, again, must spend time exercising. It doesn't matter how you exercise. It just matters that you do. So you might do some really intensive weightlifting, or you might go for a walk in the forest or something. That's fine. But again, this is, when we join, we agree to follow the structure. We agree that this is the important thing. And so when exercise period comes, we do it, even if we kind of don't want to. I personally struggle with this. Often I would much rather just like flop back in bed. But I know that exercise period is exercise period, and it's going to be so much more miserable if I fight against it in my head than if I just do it. So what I tend to do actually is, as soon as the meditation is over, I go to my room, I change into whatever I need to change to, and then I just immediately go and start sprinting. Because if I spend too long thinking about the fact that I don't want to exercise, it's just going to be terrible. And regardless, I still have to do it. So I can either be miserable about it or do whatever I can to not be miserable about it. After that, we have breakfast. So again, when you're having breakfast, you're having breakfast. Be with your food, be with your posture. When you're washing your dishes, you wash your dish well. You make sure that it's clean. You make sure that there's no soap when you put it in the dish rack. I make that mistake a lot. I've learned to be good at like washing my dish, making sure that it's clean. And then when it comes time for rinsing, my mind is just like, hey, you're done now, and just like puts it in the thing, and there's still soap dripping off of it. So that's, for me, that's an opportunity to notice when I'm not being mindful. when you're putting your leftovers away, make sure that your thing is labeled, your container is labeled, make sure that you put it in the right spot in the fridge. We have a shelf that's for personal food. Don't put personal food somewhere else. There's always a thing, the right thing to be doing. And when we're not mindful, when we're not paying attention, we just end up doing something else. After that, we have a work period of about 4 hours, 4.5 hours. And so during this work period, you know, it's important to work hard. There's 4 of us currently running the entire organization. All of us are learning as we go. Some of us know certain things, some of us know other things, but this is part of the training that we do here is actually leadership training, which means just doing the stuff that needs to be done regardless of whether you actually know how to do it or not, because maybe no one knows how to do it, but it still needs to be done. So we figure it out. So we work hard, we don't slack off. Obviously you can take breaks, but the work period is a work period. Again, it's not a time to be doing something else, it's time to be working. It's also a time to be noticing and seeing how much our decisions matter. And if we make mistakes, that our mistakes matter, that they will affect other people, they will affect the organization. We kind of can't get away from the fact that what we do matters. After that, we have lunch, which is similar to breakfast. You know, be with your food, be with your posture. Sometimes we'll have a discussion about something, wash your dishes carefully, et cetera, et cetera. After that, we have a chore period. And again, same thing, you know, this is actually, it's done in silence. But as you're doing it, are you being careful? Are you being thorough? I do a lot of dusting when I do the chore period. And I can really tell sometimes I just kind of like brush it and don't really get every corner. Whereas when I'm remembering to be mindful and to be like actually bringing myself to this thing that I'm doing, I clean much better. After that, we have free time for a few hours, and free time is an interesting thing because it's not really a break from the training. It's a time when you can decide what to do with your time, but of course, you still have to be looking at what you're doing. You have to be looking at how you're affecting other people. Of course, we can't just suddenly be messy during that time. We still have to keep our environment clean, still see how everything is being impacted by our actions. And it's interesting watching that throughout the day. During free time is usually when our standards fall, which is understandable. But this is still, every moment is actually part of the training 24/7. There's nothing that isn't, because it just wouldn't make sense. Like there's no such thing as a time when it's not important to be, you know, aware, or a time when it's not important to be compassionate, and so on. So in the evening, we do some sort of activity like circling or embodiment practices or peer coaching, Gendlin focusing, etc. And again, this is like you do the thing that you're doing. That's not a time to be thinking about work. We had our work period. The stuff that was done during that work period was done. Whatever is not is going to be worked on the next day. It's okay to just set that aside. Now we are doing this activity. After that, there's another meditation period. So again, meditation is for meditation. After that, we do another chanting period. This time it's another compassion chant where we visualize the light of compassion between ourselves and other people, and kind of accumulates to this beautiful crescendo and then fades away. And after that, we are in noble silence and it's time for bed or rest or whatever it is. So noble silence means that we're not talking to each other unless it's completely necessary. We're not making eye contact. We're not using devices. And so this is a time for sleep or for some sort of unwinding from the day. There's no like requirement to go to bed right after chanting or anything like that, but it's not really the time again to be thinking about work or like what food we're going to eat tomorrow or that conversation you're going to have with someone. I personally find it beautiful to just take my practice from chanting and try to maintain it as I go to bed, maintain that mindfulness as well as I can, and just get into bed and go to sleep. And then the next day will start. So obviously The schedule sets a very high standard, and it's very hard to meet it. And we fail all the time. We're late to activities. We don't label our food in the fridge properly. We speak during noble silence when we don't really need to. We might just lay in our bed instead of exercising. There's a lot of ways that you can not do the thing that you're intending to do in that moment. And that happens constantly. So one of the things, well, I'll say 3 of the things that I want to mention as being relevant to a structure like this are the community aspect, the laboratory conditions of it, and the inescapability of it. So we live in community. And when we join this community, when we join this residency program or apprenticeship program, we agree to this schedule. We agree to being held to a high standard of integrity. We agree to hold others to this. And this isn't, it's not intended to be like punitive, like, oh, you're like constantly doing things wrong, therefore you're bad or something like that. It's actually intended to be very loving. Because if you're being mindless and let's say you're constantly late or something, you will get that feedback from the community. You will constantly, every time that you're late, you will hear, please be on time. Or every time that you mislabel your food or wash your dish poorly and leave soap on it, someone will say, hey, you did that thing. That wasn't a good thing. And of course, sometimes we get, mad at each other for stuff like that because we're humans and we haven't totally figured out how to always come from a place of love and kindness. But in general, it's not intended to be some sort of angry thing. It's not intended to be some sort of punitive thing. It's not intended to be like you're bad and wrong for not following the structure or for not doing the thing that you're supposed to do. But you can't get away from it. You will get that feedback. And that's something that all of us agree to, and all of us agree to enthusiastically, because it's very difficult to hold ourselves when we're on our own to, well, I don't want to say that it's hard to hold ourselves to high standards, but it's hard to notice when we are missing those standards, because it's specifically because of lack of mindfulness, lack of attention, lack of whatever. And so like the community actually holds us in that. They're helpers in that. So in, our normal, regular lives, it's pretty normal to try to cover up our flaws and to pretend that they aren't there. If you're at work and you make a mistake, you kind of want to just like cover it up so that people don't notice, or that it's somehow not a big deal. And at Willow, at Maple, etc., this is actually in general considered a waste of energy. It's so much better to take the energy that you would have taken in covering up that flaw and put it towards addressing that weakness, seeing like, what happened here? How can I, how can I make it better? Or how can I ensure that this doesn't happen next time? Or what does this tell me about myself? Or so on. So it's really, we make mistakes all the time, and that's normal and it's expected. And the more that we cover up those mistakes, the less that we can learn from them. So the community can help hold us in this. And for this reason, also psychological safety is really important within the community. You have to trust that when you make a mistake, you're not going to just be, an outcast. Of course, people might get mad because maybe the thing that you did actually had a really strong impact. And that's the thing maybe that in that moment you need to learn, is that your actions have an impact. And sometimes that impact is really harmful to someone, or really like it emotionally impacts them. So we all, like I said, together kind of hold ourselves and each other to this. And we remember that we're all in this very difficult and very different journey than the one that we were in when we were outside of the center. And especially when we're, not in a good state, and when we keep, pushing against the container, doing things that we aren't supposed to do, it can be really hard to accept that, to accept other people's feedback. But even when that happens, you will still get that feedback, whether you're wanting to hear it or not. You kind of have to. There's no. I keep saying there's no escaping it, and it's, in many ways it's true, because this is. There's no way to just like go home and watch TV for a while or something, because we all live together. We all train together. We do everything together. So the second thing that I said is the laboratory conditions. So every day is pretty much the same. We even eat very similar food every day. So one of the things that's amazing about this is that you can very quickly notice changes. I can notice how I feel different when I don't exercise versus when I do. I can notice if I eat a bunch of junk food during my free time, I can see how that impacts not just that evening, but also the next morning, and how hungry I am, and how I bring myself to meditation, how much energy I have, and so on. And it's very difficult to make these laboratory conditions for ourselves when we're living on our own or just with roommates or something like that. So this is it's one of the really big benefits of living in a community that holds this structure quite strongly. And most importantly, actually, is that you notice how your mind affects certain things. So there are times when, for example, in the morning, I wake up and I just feel miserable and I don't want to go to chanting, and I feed those thoughts. I feed the fact that I don't want to do this. This sucks. And I kind of like drag myself to the cushion, and I still do it, of course. Then there's other mornings when I wake up and I have that thought. And because of, the meditation training that I've been doing, I'm actually able to kind of notice it and to be like, oh, okay, that's a thought that I'm having. I'm going to not feed that. I'm going to instead focus on how this water feels on my hands as I'm washing my hands. And then the thought comes up back again. Ugh, I don't want to go to chanting. Okay, I'm going to brush my teeth, and so on. And it just becomes so much easier. And I can see day after day after day, the days when I'm like feeding into that misery feel so much worse than the days when I'm actually putting my training into practice and just not feeding the misery, going through the things that I agreed to go through, that the group is holding me through, and seeing how much better the entire day goes. Seeing the impact that my mind and my attention can have on everything. Like, it's wild. I can't overstate it. But in the normal world that most of us live in, you can kind of change your environment. And so I'm going to go into the third aspect now of the inescapability of this. Is in the normal world, if I wake up, I don't know if normal world's the best way to call it. In the world that most of us live in, you wake up, you're feeling miserable, probably you can just let yourself sleep in or something. You might have to go to work, but a lot of the time you can just like, I feel crappy about this, therefore I'm going to change the conditions so that the conditions stop feeling crappy. And of course, this isn't like a bad thing. It's good to be able to change conditions, of course. But there is this incredible, impossible seeming learning around changing our internal conditions when we aren't able to change the external ones. So it doesn't matter how much I don't want to exercise. That exercise period is not going to be changing. Of course, we can discuss as a group, maybe it's actually better if we don't have an exercise period or something. It's not that like everything is so rigid that it can never be discussed or changed, but if I'm thinking, hey, maybe we shouldn't have an exercise period, then I really need to process that. It's like, okay, what is the benefit of this? If I'm going to bring this to the group as a potential idea, is this really being done out of compassion, out of willingness to strive to be better, out of holding each other accountable? Or am I just kind of feeling blah right now, and I want the structure to change to support my blah? And it's really nice and really hard, but really nice to be in a space that isn't going to manipulate itself around my preferences. You know, this structure it's a good structure. There's a lot of really healthy stuff in there. Exercise is good, meditation is good. We work for 4.5 hours a day. It's not like we're working 10-hour days or something. And so it really kind of forces you to see your own internal world and see the impact that your internal world has on your experience, and to adjust your internal conditions even when you can't adjust the external ones. And so again, I do want to reiterate, of course, it is important to change external conditions sometimes. I'm not at all saying that we should never want to change our external world, just that it's an incredibly useful skill to be able to change the internal world, and that often it's good to start with that. And another thing, again, about the inescapability of all of this is that if you aren't actually throwing yourself into this training, throwing yourself into changing the way that your mind works, noticing the causality between things, between the way that you think, the way that you act, the way that you feel, and so on, if you aren't willing to introspect in that way, if you aren't willing to try to change, it's just unbearable. The training becomes unbearable. It's actually easier to do the work of trying to change, of trying to grow, than it is to not grow. This is something that I recently read in a paper about Maple. It basically said, like, if you are at Maple, it is easier to grow than it is to not grow, because you have to fight. You have to fight constantly in order to keep your patterns. Whereas if you kind of just surrender into this and throw yourself into the training, into the structure, you just kind of inevitably through that process end up growing. And it's so beautiful, but it can take a while to stop fighting. I still find myself internally frequently fighting. I think this is a very, very common thing. But I'm so glad to be, there are times when I'm like, oh yeah, I vaguely miss my old life, and I do. There's never been a time when I've thought, oh, it would be better to leave here, to go back to my old life. Never. There are times when I just wish I could, control my external world a bit more, sleep in the middle of the day, or talk with my friends late into the night online or something. But I see the way in which I'm becoming better through this practice, through the structure, through these people, through the teachings, through my teacher. And it's just, I might have some short-term benefits to being able to break from the structure or something like that. And those can be lovely. But for my, broader and long-term development, doing this training and holding this container and helping others, helping hold this container so that others can go through this extremely challenging process is, as far as I can tell, one of the most important things that I personally can be doing, and has been so much better for my own growth, for my own maturity, in almost every way, emotional maturity, physical strength, health, wellness, leadership potential. I'm doing so many more things that I never would have done before, because I'm just like placed in this situation and I just have to do it. I mean, I agreed to it beforehand. Some part of me agrees. It says, yes, I want to be held to this. And then I'm in the thing and I'm like, oh, crap. Okay, well, now I have to do it. And then I do it and then I'm better. And I said in the beginning that this kind of, the structure is sort of invisible. In a way, it's not, because obviously I just laid out a very clear and rigid daily schedule. But often people really fight against it. They will try to push boundaries here and there, just a little bit, you know. And that's and I've done that too. And it's a great opportunity for, you know, self-introspection. It's like, oh, why am I always like 15 seconds late? Why am I always leaving soap on my spoon, or frequently leaving soap on my spoon? What is it that's happening? And it just starts to feel miserable to keep doing those bad things. And you just kind of like fall into place, into like just becoming better and helpful, more caring, more capable, more competent, etc. So I've talked a lot about what we do. I'm going to talk a little bit about how it might be possible to bring this sort of structure into our regular lives for those who don't live monastically. And I think probably from what I've said, it's likely fairly clear that I think that the community aspect of this is quite vital. It's very difficult to do this stuff on your own because you don't have that feedback, that immediate feedback, that constant feedback from other people. So if you live with others, that's potentially a great avenue towards creating some sort of structure together that you just agree to hold each other to. Of course, it doesn't have to be as strict as we do it here, but if it's something like, hey, we're going to do, let's say, exercise every day at 10 a.m. and you both agree to it, and then you're just kind of stuck with that. Just be stuck with that. Don't have some sort of, I mean, I suppose you could put in like a what's it called, backdoor or something. But in general, the more that you can commit with others to something and then just hold each other to that and say like, yes, we actually agreed on this together, even though right now we don't want to be doing this. Let's hold each other in that. That can be really beneficial. So ideally, if you're living with people, that's probably the easiest way for that to happen. But of course, it doesn't have to be people you're living with. It could be people that you see. Obviously, with COVID, we don't see people very much. But if you say want to go running every day, you could have a running partner. You could have check-in partners that you check in with online every day or every week or something like that. Again, I think that very difficult to do this sort of thing on your own. There's a book called Atomic Habits, which I'm personally a big fan of. So that can be something that can help people get into structures and habits on their own. Of course, practices like journaling can help. But the thing that I would really say is find others and hold each other to the standards that you want to be held to the standards that you agree to be held to. And one thing that we're going to be doing at Willow sometime soon, over the next few weeks, we'll have more information about it, but we're going to start something like, right now I'm calling it an accountability group, although I don't like that term, but something where we meet every week and we just talk about, what we intended to do, whatever intentions we set for that week, whether we're doing it, whether we're holding to whatever structure we set out and so on. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can join our mailing list. I'll say more about that later, but having these sort of accountability structures can also be really helpful as well. But again, people you live with and immediate feedback, immediate and inescapable feedback are probably the most important things. So to the extent that you can do that, I highly, highly recommend it. And of course, if you're interested in going to Maple or to Oak or to Willow, we have spots for residency and for apprenticeship. And so you can reach out to us about that. Maple is in Vermont, Willow is near Toronto in Canada, and Oak is in the Bay Area in California. So I think this is a good time to do a bit of a transition. We'll do a short meditation. Well, short for me. We'll do like 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more. So if you have, things that are ringing in your head, questions that you want to ask or something, maybe just write them down for now so that they're not rattling around in your head during the meditation. And then once we finish that, we'll go into a discussion period, a Q&A. Okay, great. I don't have my bell, so I'm just going to say ding. So find a comfortable position wherever you are. And this meditation is one of my very favorites. One of the things that my teacher frequently will teach is that you should meditate with the body, not with the mind. He trained in Japan, and when he came back to North America, he said he was surprised that meditation here is taught as something that you do with the mind, because he was taught that it's something that you do with the body. So I will guide meditation with the body. Ding. So find whatever posture is comfortable for you. If you're sitting down, then something alert and upright, but still relaxed. You don't need to be rigid. And there's two aspects that are important in this particular meditation. And as long as you're doing these two, you're doing it. So the first is when you're exhaling, see if you can make the exhale be as long as it can while still being comfortable for your body. You don't have to strain or force. Just let the air move very slowly as it comes out. And just let it keep going and going and going. Many of us take very shallow breaths, and so you may actually be surprised to see how long your exhale can actually be. And you can let the inhale just be natural. You can make it long, you don't have to. And the important thing here is making the exhale long. And the second thing that we're doing is feeling the breath as low in the body as you can. So if you're familiar with breathing from the diaphragm, from the abdomen, then do that. Feel the rise and fall of your belly. If you're more of a chest breather, like I was for decades, it may be difficult to feel the breath low in the body, and that's okay. Just feel it as low as you can. Maybe that's just the bottom of your chest, and that's okay. So 2 things. Extend the exhale as long as it can go, and let the breath be as low as it can be. And don't strain, don't force yourself. And the beautiful thing about this practice is that it doesn't matter what your mind is doing. As long as you're breathing in this way and keeping your attention low, keeping your breath low, you're doing it correctly. Your mind can be going off on all sorts of things. It's fine. Just keep doing the breath. The beauty of this is that the body just learns how to do it. It's mechanical. And the more that the body does it, the more that it knows how to continue doing it. And over time, through this simple mechanical body process, the experience of the breath just naturally becomes louder in your attention. And the experience of thoughts in the mind just naturally, with time, become quieter. You don't have to force them to be quieter. It's just mechanical. It's just the body doing what it's doing. Long exhale, low in the body. Just let the body do the work. It's okay if your attention is 90% on your mind and 10% on your breath. with time, this practice will just naturally take it to 11%, 12%, 15, 20. And eventually the breath becomes the entire experience. With time, with practice, with letting the body continue doing what it's doing. Generally, it's good to do this practice for 20, 30 minutes more. But today we'll take another 30 seconds. Just gotten a bit of a taste for this. And can take a little bit of time to wiggle your fingers and toes, open your eyes and come back into the space, into the screen in front of you, and transition into a period of sharing and discussing. Ding. Thank you, everyone. So I think, yeah, Peter, if you have any things to say that happen at this transition of discussion, feel free. Otherwise, we can just jump into it.
I'm going to get my own ding here for when the question period starts. So will Lucas, Yashoda, you had a question. We can jump with you. And then anyone else has a question, just start putting it in the chat now. Lucas, Yashoda, are you there?
Hi, I'm in for Lucas, actually. I was going to ask about the fact that the regime that you were describing from the monastery sounds a lot like other military regimes. And I was wondering if there are any key differences or similarities that you might have noticed, if you know anything about that sort of thing, or if there's something you really want to, I don't know, examples to use to really distinguish it from those military regimes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I have never been in the military, and I don't have like people in my family or close friends who have been in that. So the comparison is sort of, I can't do it justice probably, but with what I know of how these things happen in the military, is the main difference that I can think of is that there isn't that sort of like, certainly there are similarities, and I'm glad that you're pointing that out, but let's say that you're doing something wrong or you're late or something like that. There's no like, no one's going to yell at you. No one's going to call you names. It's not that type of motivation. Like the only thing that's going to happen is someone's going to say, please be on time. And if we have someone called, well, we have a role called care, and two people are in charge of care. There's the primary care person and the secondary care person, or the care assistant. And these are people who hold the role of, and who have the responsibility for making sure that the group is kind of mentally healthy and cared for and being taken care of. And so for instance, let's say that someone is normally following the schedule fine and then suddenly starts being late a lot or kind of pushing against things. the care person will actually check in with them and say like, hey, what's been going on? Do you need help? Do you need support? Let's talk. It's very much held in and from love. If we're doing any of this stuff from compassion or from anger or from like disdain, then it's completely wrong and we need to cut it off. And that's one of the things that I hold actually really strongly is sometimes even if I have feedback for someone, if I'm feeling angry, I won't give it, because that actually in my view, that causes more damage. So that aspect of like really holding things with love and like being like, hey, we all agreed to this. You yourself want to be held to the standard. Right now you're doing something different. How can we help? How can we make it so that we all kind of come back to holding ourselves in the integrity that we agreed to hold ourselves to? My sense is that the military isn't quite like that. But again, I've never been in the military, so I don't know. Does that answer the question? I'm happy to do any follow-ups if you have follow-up questions.
Any follow-up, Alex?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, fantastic. So what I was saying was that I really like your description there. From what it sounds like, it takes everything I liked about a military regime and replaces all of the parts that I disliked, like the disdain and the resentment that could form, with that compassion. So I love that rigid structure, and hearing about your experiences is really inspiring me to look at how I treat myself in my own structures that I make. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really nice to hear.
David, you said you had a question. If you can unmute yourself.
Hi. Lovely to
Hi.
be with y'all. I'd like to invite your comments on sort of the how of discipline and responsibility. And I'll lead in with a story. A dear teacher of mine passed this week, Mel Weitzman, abbot of Berkeley Zen. And in a ritual question and answer, I've shared this on Twitter a couple of times. I'm standing in front of him in the assembly, and I ask out of a Zen story. Zen teacher Nan Chuan says, if you try to approach it, you'll miss it. And I asked Mel, so what are we to do? And he knows me a little bit. I'm a bit of a hard ass, very self-demanding, and chafe at being told what to do. Nan Chuan says, if you try to approach it, you'll miss it. So what are we to do? Mel says to me, don't try so hard. I soften up. I mean, that just fit. I smile and I bow, and he says, like that. Playing around, discipline has as an etymology, student, disciple, learner. Responsibility, I only just now learned, has a connection with a word I didn't know before, spondee, which is both a poetic meter and a ritual pouring of a little bit of a drink to recognize the sacredness of a event you're about to do, a libation. And so I'm playing with those qualities of discipline and responsibility as an effect, potentially like a poem or a dance, where we allow ourselves to access, like the body, rather than just thinking, other angels of our nature to come and inhabit the behaviors we're engaged with. So that was my question. Playing with or further exploring qualities of discipline and responsibility.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a big, kind of broad question. I think, especially what you brought up around like the I'll paraphrase it, but kind of like the rigidity or like trying so hard and then learning how to not to still do it without trying so hard. That is something that, in my experience, at least in structures like this, just has to happen. Otherwise it becomes unbearable. And sometimes, hopefully we don't have to do this, but sometimes we just have to hit that wall and hit that wall and hit that wall and hit that wall and hit that wall until we realize that we actually don't have to keep hitting that wall, and it's easier if we don't do it. And if we can, from the beginning, approach it with that level of, vigor without the tightness or whatever, then it works beautifully. But sometimes we have to learn it the hard way, and that's going to depend on our history, our past. It's going to depend on our views on what certain things mean. There's a process that my teacher takes me through of different aspects of the breath, and the breath should be calm, energetic, centered, playful, and be felt in the whole body. And anytime I was practicing with the energetic one, I would just be like forcing it and forcing it and forcing it. And yes, it would be energetic, but all of the other things would fall away. And learning to have my breath be energetic and calm is just this massive shift of like, oh, energy can exist without like forcefulness and without tightness and without like smashing or something. But that's a lesson that I've had to just like learn the hard way, and sometimes have to relearn again. Like he'll tell me, bring in more energy, and I'm like, he's like, no, not like that. So yeah, I mean, it's a really important balance, and I don't know of some, way to like snap your finger and be in that balance. It's actually just a thing that each of us has to kind of discover, sometimes the hard way, sometimes the easy way. But most importantly, as far as I can tell, is just like not being able to escape from that discovery. And sometimes I just have to do things until they're untenable, until I just have to see like, oh, this actually can't keep going like this. So that's the best answer I can give right now. But it's a good question. It's a broad question. I think it's the sort of thing you could just talk about forever.
Cool. You're cool for that, David? Okay. Sierra, you're up next.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for your chat so far. It's been wonderful. I have a question regarding intuition. At one moment you had said that there's always a right thing to do, and if you're not mindful, you'll do something else. And so in regards to things like art and creativity, where it is more open-ended, I'm wondering if you could speak to how your practice is involved in that way, like if your intuition is strengthened through your mindfulness, and if you are willing to trust yourself more strongly, or if you trust the structure that you're within. Don't know if that really makes sense, but if you could speak to intuition.
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot. The question makes sense. And yeah, there is a way to take the whole like there is always a right thing to do. There's a way to take that too far. It's not so much that like everything is completely laid out and like. What I meant by that is like if it's the exercise period, then we know we should be exercising. But then the discovery of which exercise you should be doing, that can be more intuitive or more. You can also just say like every single day I will do exactly these exercises, and that's fine. That's a completely fine thing to do. But you can also kind of be like, okay, I'm going to feel into my body. What is happening right now? What is my body needing? And it depends a little bit on what we mean by intuition, of course, because that's a sort of vague and fuzzy term. But one way to look at it is to be in touch with various ways of knowing. So we can have the intellectual way of knowing. That's the one that most of us are most familiar with. But then there's, emotions, emotional ways of knowing. You feel into how something feels. Does this make me sad? Does this make me happy? And so on, and like explore that. You feel into how the body feels, somatic ways of knowing. So if I'm imagining, let's say, lifting weights, how does my body resonate with that? And so as we learn imaginal ways of knowing, for example, like what images pop into my head when this thing is happening. And so bringing more awareness to all of these things actually helps us become more attuned with what we could call intuition, which is basically just like noticing more about what is happening. And the point is definitely not to just like become people who follow structure. Like that is, if that is what people get out of this training, then I have failed. But the structure is meant as a support so that we can actually like notice these things, notice these ways of being, notice these ways of knowing, notice how we approach certain situations, what happens in our minds at certain times, how does that affect everything else, so that we can finish this training or do some amount of this training and then go back out into the world and be more capable, be more trustworthy, be able to trust ourselves and our decisions more because we are so much more in touch with what's happening. So I don't personally see those two things as being in conflict. They might be at any like given specific time where it's like, oh, I really want to sleep right now, but it's a meal time. Then yes, you have to just go to the meal. Unless you're sick, you can get an exception from care, etc. But really the point of the structure and of the rigidity is actually to hold us and to help us be more mature in all of the different ways. And that includes learning how to be more in touch with our intuition as well.
Beautiful, thank you.
All right, Robin, you're up next.
Hi there. So my question is about memory and memorization, and I'm just wondering how important do you feel those are on the path of awareness?
Can you give an example of like what sort of memorization you mean?
Well, memory and memorization are not my strong points, and so just even to think back on your talk and to remember like the 3 points you made about, you know, the third one, which was inescapability. You know, it's like I couldn't remember the first 2. So I write things down a lot, but it's just something that I struggle with. And so I was just wondering how you feel about that.
I, for some reason, am the sort of person who will, in general, internalize something and then forget the details of it. And so like, I'll read a book and I will actually like, in a lot of ways, internalize what it's saying and shift my behavior as a result. But then if someone asks me what that book is about, I'm kind of like, it's kind of about maybe this. So I don't, certainly memory is good, or remembering things is good, but I don't know that it's like, if you don't remember the exact specifics of something, I don't know that that means that you haven't internalized it or that you haven't gotten something from it. There are, like I said, different ways of knowing, and one of those is intellectual, and it's an important way. And, you know, writing things down and memory are good things good skills to have and good things to train. But I don't personally see that as something that's like, that has to be a big blocker in the path. When my teacher gives talks, he lets us take notes if we want to, but he doesn't particularly encourage it. What he actually says is that you should be meditating. Don't even listen to my talk. Don't hear my talk. You should just be meditating. The talk is only here so that if you get distracted from your meditation, it's something that you can put your mind onto so that it can bring you back into your meditation. In the ideal world, you're actually just meditating. You're not even hearing. It's just like sounds passing through you. You're not getting the content of it. That's paraphrasing what he's saying and probably not entirely accurate. So like whatever mistakes are there, those are on me, not on him. But yeah, I would definitely not see that sort of thing as a blocker, but it is a useful tool to, you know, our intellect is a very useful tool. And so the things that we can do to help it and to train it are positive, but it's totally okay if you've forgotten the first 2 of the 3, because probably you actually haven't forgotten. You just might not be able to like say them to someone, but in some sort of way, I would imagine that they're actually still with you.
Any follow-up question, Robin? Nope. Ryan, you had a question. Ryan, are you here? If not, I will read his question. Okay.
I can be here. I'm just on my cell phone, so just a second. Sorry. So yeah, I was wondering about how you guys incorporate the concepts and actions of play and joy into your regimen, and similarly the concept of novelty, serendipity, and how those might relate to like constructive evolution of self or community, or the container that you guys are building together.
Yeah, so it's again one of those like kind of big and broad questions. So I'll say a bit on it, but I have the sense that there's, you know, a lot that you can say on this. Certainly joy, like most other things, is something that can be cultivated. And it's something that each of us has the ability, you could even say the responsibility or the duty, if such a thing is appealing, but we certainly all have the ability to cultivate joy and to cultivate love and those things, playfulness and such. And I think in meditation specifically, having that playfulness and sort of like joyful approach to the exploration of meditation is really, really, if not essential, then very important. You can meditate and just be rigid about it and joyless about it, and it will get you relatively far, but having that playfulness is, I would say, a pretty significant, maybe mandatory aspect of the path. And so we have part of what we do during our meditation periods is in some of the periods we have interviews, one-on-one interviews between the student and the teacher. In our case, I'm the teacher. There's other teachers at the other branches, and the student demonstrates their meditation and maybe discusses it in some way. And there are times when I will notice that someone is being, you know, really rigid, really not enjoying it, really not joyful about it at all. And then the thing that I bring in is kind of like, hey, look at that playfulness. Maybe see if that is something that can be brought into your practice. What is it that's happening right now that that isn't leaning in that direction, that's leaning away? Let's investigate that, and so on. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I would say is just through exploring other, like I said, in the evening we have various activities, different activities each night. Some of them are pretty consistent, like circling, which we do every day. And then sometimes we'll just like bring in something new and be like, what was the effect of this? How did we feel? And so, for example, one activity that we've done twice now is what we're calling like Buddhist Drama, which is, what's it called? We basically play like little drama games, improv games with each other. And see how that feels and see what effect that has on us, on our attention, on like what we're wanting, what we're not wanting, what we're like kind of pushing away from, the ways in which it's helping us inquire into ourselves. And so it's a really fun way to kind of like bring in some playfulness into what we're doing while still like really being with it and like using it as a beautiful method for exploration. So the Buddhist drama thing is just kind of one example, but like we do kind of bring in these other activities and then say like, hey, is this bringing in something that we've been missing? How do we feel from this? What impact is it having on us in the meditation after, in the whatever, the next day? And so those are little ways where like we can kind of inject things that maybe aren't quite as present in other parts of the schedule, or at least not as clearly. I personally would say that like playfulness and joyfulness are really vital aspects to what we're doing, but I will admit that it's not quite as clear cut as like where they fit into the schedule. It's just kind of this like background that we're trying to develop through everything that we do. So again, like the other question, it's kind of, we could talk about this for a long time, and it's a good question, but that's kind of a brief answer to that.
Any follow-up question?
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Similarly, I guess I'm curious a little bit about like eros and where eroticism fits in. Yeah. So if you will, yeah, however you want to answer that, would be cool.
Yeah, I personally, like not in the group, but I personally have been doing soul making practice recently for myself. That's Rob Burbea's work, and that really brings in the eros side of things. The kind of like, often in Buddhism, there's this kind of anti-desire bent, which like it talks about a particular type of desire, which can be unhelpful, but there is like a type of desire that is really beautiful and then drives us forward, and like that's the thing that wants us to be better people, that like wants us to be more helpful and so on. And there is a way to kind of lean into that type of desire, or that type of eros in our beings. I don't personally involve that in my teachings, because one of the standards that we have in the Monastic Academy system for teachers is that you should never teach something that you yourself have not experienced or discovered or whatever. So it would be very out of integrity for me to be teaching people about soul making or about eros stuff when it's something that I myself am just like only starting to dip my toe into. So certainly I would encourage people to explore it if they want to, but it's not something that I have any right to be putting into the structure so far, or into the teaching that I do personally.
Let's end with Nick Benjamin.
Hey, Seishin.
Hey, friend.
Hey, Colin and Yuli. Yeah, so for some general information, I was just at Willow and at Maple for some time, and it was the most meaningful experience of my life. And in coming out of that, life is very hard. We end up going from that little peak where we our ego adapted and we constantly play our best hand, down into the adaptive valley. So we're following the path outside of our comfort zone, and it gets harder. And for many people that I've spoken to who are or were on the path, it's just getting harder. So why do it at all? I know you could file this under skeptical doubt, and yeah, just want to hear your opinion.
Why do the path when it makes regular life more untenable?
Yes.
Yeah. Someone said on Twitter, it's a common quote, it's like, better not to start, and if you start, better to finish. So the trouble is that you've started. I mean, there's a sort of question that I kind of want to send back, which is basically, do you think that you would have been happy continuing your life as it was for the rest of your life?
Yeah. So this question isn't for me. I'm excited to just burst into a ball of flames and take all the tiny stories that wrap this little ego with me, crash and burn. And that's kind of what I'm doing right now, with a lot of joy and a lot of sorrow. And the answer to your question is no, not at all. Now it's like a moth to the flame, and there's no stopping it, and it's very scary. And it's as if Willow gave me a rear view mirror with which to see, oh, that was my ego. Oh, that was my ego. And I don't know where I'm going, but the ego's under full-fledged assault, and there's no ground, and there's just only falling. Yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I probably said this quote to you while you were here, but if not, because I think you kind of paraphrased it right now. And I don't remember which master it was that said it, but it's, the bad news is that you're falling and you don't have a parachute. The good news is that there's no ground. So you're just going to keep falling. But the question for why someone should do this or should want to do this is basically, you shouldn't if you don't think that this is actually, if this isn't actually appealing, if this isn't actually drawing you in some very important way. You should do the thing that seems most important to you. Like, absolutely. And for some people, that will draw them to some sort of path like this. For some people, it won't. But I have no intention of like forcing this on anyone. And I can't make the claim that it is the best thing for everyone. Certainly, I can't find anything that I could be doing that could be better. And I've spent a lot of time trying, just kind of continuously being like, really? A monastery is what's drawing me in? No, maybe I'll do this software work instead. No, maybe I'll do this instead. And then over the years, it was like, no, this is actually the most important thing for me. But it's a very, it has to be a personal thing, and it has to be internally driven. And I imagine that it's not for everyone. So yeah, I think maybe I'll leave it at that. If you start, better to finish.
Thank you, Nick. And Seishin, would you like any final words to close off today?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, everyone. It's been really, really lovely being with you all. I can just share a couple of announcements and things. If you go to our website, growingwillow.org, we actually added growingwillow.org/stoa. It will give you information about a couple of things that I'm about to talk about. There's a couple of interesting papers that are on there. One is called Maple, a Deliberately Developmental Organization, which is written by a former resident from the Monastic Academy about the ways that the Monastic Academy system helps with human development. There's another one called Monasteries of the Future, which was a master's thesis done by a different resident, talking about the role of monasteries in society and how they can serve modern society. So I think some of you might be interested in kind of reading more about stuff like that. We also have an upcoming meditation workshop, kind of introducing the fundamentals of meditation, some of the science behind it, some of the spirituality behind it, a couple of different types of techniques. It's a 4-hour workshop that we're running tomorrow and on Sunday. It's the same workshop on both days, sorry, tomorrow and next Sunday. And it's the same workshop. So if that's something that interests you, or if you know other people who might be interested, I highly recommend signing up for that. It's on a sliding scale, and I believe there's still some free tickets available. And there's like a pay what you can option. So I would love to see you there. You can join our mailing list or join our Slack group if you want to kind of stay in touch, learn more about things that we're doing, learn about events that are coming up. Also, that accountability group that I mentioned, we'll be announcing that sometime in the next few weeks. Of course, if you're interested in coming as a resident or as an apprentice, you can reach out to us. And finally, we've just recently started this last year. And we have a crowdfunding campaign happening on our website on growingwillow.org. So if this is something that you're interested in supporting, if you find it beneficial, if you'd like us to be able to continue doing what we're doing, I would very much appreciate any help and support that we can receive in that. It's really important to me to be able to give as much of this as we can, like completely freely, because I don't like the idea of it being kind of tied to people's finances. So we do rely on donations from people in order to continue. And we're very much early stage still, so trying to build up that runway, to use a startup term. So if you can, share that on social media, if you're interested in doing that, or contributing anything yourself, that would be really beautiful. Really, I'd be quite grateful for that. So yeah, go to growingwillow.org/stoa to see about all of those things that I just said. Thank you.
Cool. I'll make some brief closing announcements, but Seishin, thanks so much for coming to the Stoa. You're welcome back anytime. And thank you for everyone for showing and asking the excellent questions. We have an event today at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, Consciousness and Spirituality Explained with Frank Healy as a 2-part series. And then tomorrow, the Evolving Ground series with Charlie Ardrey and Jared Janes. It's going to be on confidence. So that's at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. That being said, everyone, thanks for coming to the Stoa today.